Like many of you listening to this show, I have experienced divorce firsthand in my life. My parents divorced when I was 18 years old, and as I have traveled the country and spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people over the years of ministry that God has given me, I have met more and more parents who are struggling with the ramifications of divorces that happen in their families 15, sometimes 20, even 30 years ago. It's a different thing to be an adult child of a divorce. And today, my guest is going to talk about this. Kent Darcie is here with me, and I met him when we were speaking together at Pigeon Forge for Teach Them Diligently, and I was absolutely blessed and encouraged to see somebody tackling this really important topic. Kent is the founder of Adults with Divorced Parents Ministries. He's a licensed professional counselor in Southeast Michigan, and he is a speaker and the author of a new book called Choose a Better Path: Overcoming the Impact of Your Parents' Divorce. This is going to be a great conversation, and I hope one that alters your perspective of how you can find hope and healing after a divorce in your family. This is the Heidi St. John podcast. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So, Kent, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad you're here.
It is so great to be with you, Heidi.
Well, I told you just a few minutes ago, I have been really looking forward to this conversation. Most of the people that listen to my show and have listened to it for years and years know that I came from a divorced home. My parents divorced when I was 18, and their divorce had a profound impact on my life. Absolutely profound. And I know that my siblings would say the same thing. There are 7 of us. And it's interesting to me that even now as a 54-year-old woman, there are still things that I look back on and they really do still hurt. It's kind of an amazing thing. And I'm really glad that you're talking about this. So I've got so many things I want to ask you, but I really like to start out by just finding out a little bit more about you.
Okay.
Why is this topic so important to you? Where did you come from? Tell us a little bit about you, because this is your first time on the show, but I don't think it'll be the last.
Okay. Basically, you know what? I want to do a couple of public service announcements before we start.
Yes.
First of all, when we're talking about this topic, everything we're going to talk about today, we are not blaming anybody. One of the big issues with adults with divorced parents is we often don't want to talk about it because we're afraid if we do it, we're actually bad-mouthing our parents or whatever. And Elizabeth Marquardt had a really great comment about that. She said, this is not about bashing our parents or knocking people who are divorced. This is about trying to prevent another generation from blindly walking down the path of divorce and not knowing why. So I'm not dealing with the theology of divorce. We're not going to talk about the right or wrong reasons for divorce. My parents were divorced, and I love them. And the Bible says, honor your father and your mother. So divorcing, bashing divorced people is not what this is about. Basically, the ministry is the divorce happened. What are the implications of it, and how do we overcome those issues? So I wanted to say that right out of the gate because people might be listening and going, oh, no, they're going
here
to
we
do,
go.
And no, there's no here you go. And the other thing is everything we're going to talk about today is in the center of the bell curve, which basically means that you have your outliers. On one end, the little side, you have the people that the divorces were so chummy that you wonder why on earth they divorced at all.
Right.
And then the other side, you've got the neglect and the abuse and all that sort of stuff. But the majority of the divorces are in the center. Some kind of lean towards the really crazy stuff and some kind of lean towards the chummy stuff. But the bulk of what we're going to talk to today is about the average parental divorce that happens and how it affects it. Now, for me, how I got into this was that my parents divorced also. I was 13 when they got divorced, and for probably the next 30 years, thought it was no big deal. Oh, yeah, I had some anger issues, and the holidays were a hassle and all that sort of stuff. But if you had asked me, unlike what you had said, Heidi, that I know there were some issues, if you had asked me, I would have said, I'm good. And a lot of the people I talk with, I'm good. And what I learned, I was led to a book called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. And what I learned was that first, there was millions of me out there, and I had no idea. We hear about the divorce rate, it's so high and all this sort of stuff, but you never really connect the dots that 1 million children a year are being affected by parents separating and divorcing still. And then the second thing I learned was that the divorce was, in fact, impacting me. So at the time, I was serving on the deacon board of my church, and I said, hey, we need to tell people about this. And I'm a researcher by heart and love to do research, and I interviewed authors and all sorts of people. And they said, well, do a seminar. So I did my first all-day seminar 20 years ago, actually, this year. And that was kind of what launched me to this ministry.
Wow. And I'm imagining that you've had some pretty interesting feedback from this, because when I was introduced to your ministry, I was talking to my husband about it a couple days after, because I think I met you in Nashville, correct? I think so.
It was
at a
Pigeon
conference?
Forge.
Pigeon Forge, yeah, Nashville, Tennessee. It's the same.
Yeah, so
out there. Out from Washington. Yeah. Anyway, I remember thinking, why is I told Jay, why is he the first guy that in all of my travels and all my speaking that he's focusing on this? Because I know so many people like myself whose parents divorced and kind of just don't talk about it. But the truth is, parental divorce during childhood really can have a profound impact on kids after they grow. And so that's a lot of what you're talking about, the impact of parental divorce when the divorce occurs. And you call this gray divorce. Let's define that a little bit so that people understand the terms.
Okay. A couple different things. You have adult children of divorce, which are basically children of divorce. They're people that their parents divorced when they were kids. And what we've had in the last, surge in the last roughly 10 to 15 years is parents that are waiting until the kids are grown to get divorced. And that's called gray divorce, because gray hair, empty nest, that sort of thing. And that is now double digits. It's near 1 in 3 is gray divorce. So I deal with, you're seeing all those commercials now, the silver, singles and all this sort of stuff. A lot of that is because of the gray divorce. At the conference we were at, I talked with people 38 years and their parents were divorcing, 42 years and their parents were divorcing, 48 years and their parents were divorcing.
Man. Go to all if once you've made it that far, it just seems like, yeah.
And really, the gray divorce, that's a whole program in itself, because it's just there's just misnomers about, the kids are grown, no big deal.
Yeah,
they'll be
care.
Okay. And in reality, in some ways, it's worse.
That is what I have heard. I have several friends whose parents got divorced when their kids were grown, and so now they've got grandchildren. And I would agree with that. I mean, from what I'm hearing and the just the description of what these adults are going through, it really is painful and it kind of blindsides them.
Well, it's and one of the problems with gray divorce, why it's harder, is for a couple of reasons. The big one is that there's no support. When children's parents divorce, and particularly these days, my parents divorced, 50 years ago now. And back then, there was no support. There was no, how do you help children in divorce and all that sort of stuff. And today, thankfully, there's a lot of books. There's, divorce care for kids. There's, all sorts of programs. The youth pastors are up on it. Counselors at schools are up on it. And they know, man, if the parents are divorcing, it's a big deal and we need to help these kids. With gray divorce, if you're 28 and at work and you get the call that your parents are divorcing after 35 years, what you're going to get is, what's the big deal? I mean, you're out of the house. It's not
truly
a huge deal. And they deserve to have a happy life. And what they don't get is that everything is different from here on. One of the things that there's a book called Home Will Never Be the Same Again by Hughes and Friedenberg. And basically, one of the quotes they have in there is that there's no them anymore. Mom and dad always goes together.
Right.
Mom and dad, grandpa and grandma. And now it's mom, period, dad, period. We used to go to grandma and grandpa's house. Now we go to grandma or grandpa's house. And the people that are going through gray divorce now have to deal with not only the issue of explaining to their kids why grandpa and grandma don't love each other anymore, but they are also dealing with another major issue with people that go through gray divorce, and that is loyalty challenge. You are now old enough to understand why your dad's a deadbeat or why your mom is a deadbeat. So you should be choosing me and whatever. And how can you support them? And it just puts huge pressure on these people. And it's very, very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see why that would be so difficult. You're addressing something, like I said a moment ago, that is just so, it's hard to talk about. Like it can kind of drudge up. A lot of times when you're a grown up and you kind of live through that, you're like, hey, I'm gonna put that over here on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, it impacts you in ways that you may not even understand and may not notice.
Oh, absolutely.
Why did you think that this was important enough to write a book about it, to devote a ministry to it?
Well, Nicholas Wolfinger talks about the fact that if somebody from a divorced family marries somebody from an intact family, the odds of the marriage failing increases 50%.
Wow.
If somebody from a broken home comes, as compared to two people from intact families, if somebody from a broken home marries somebody from a broken home with divorced parents, then the odds of the marriage failing increase over 200% compared to people that from intact families. And for a lot of reasons. I mean, the major issues that impact adults with divorced parents are the very issues that undermine healthy relationships. So it kind of goes together. And I just found that nobody was talking about it. And it's a huge issue out there. Basically, playing fast and loose with the numbers, half of the people that are watching or listening to this right now have divorced parents. That's half of the people in your church, half of the people in your bowling league, half of the people at the restaurants you eat at, half of just about everybody you know has divorced parents. When I do a workshop or a seminar, or I do a teaching, half of the people, unless it's college students, half of the people there have divorced already, and they don't know why.
Yeah.
So it's super important, and I really appreciate the opportunity to bring this topic to the forefront because it's affecting a lot of people, and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, it's really true. I was kind of drawn into just the back cover of your book. And you start out by saying your parents are divorced and it's a hassle at times, but overall it's no big deal. Let's do a quick check. Do you have trouble trusting people? I was like, ooh, check. Are you secretly fearful that whatever situation or relationship you're in will suddenly fall apart? Do you dread or hate Thanksgiving and Christmas? Do loved ones or friends say you have a problem with anger? Do you often feel worthless or inadequate? Is the real reason you decided to live together because you're afraid you can't do the marriage thing successfully? These are some of the common issues that you address that affect adults with divorced parents. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could just jump into some of those, because I guarantee you that people are listening to this going, oh, hey, yeah, I see myself in a statement like that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I do a conference or I'm speaking or whatever, a lot of times I'll just take the book, flip it over, and have them read the questions.
Right. I mean, that's what drew me in. I was like, oh, hey, yeah. I mean, I think, the Lord's been good to me. My husband came from an intact family, and we've been married for coming up on 35 years. Awesome. And I look at what God has done in my life and consider it to be a miracle, right? That Jay and I have survived and not only just survived, but have thrived and have raised, a bunch of children, lots of them. And I just think, wow, and so many other people I know have not had that experience, right? Because what you said, the statistics bear it out.
Yeah. Well, the major issues that affect adults with divorced parents, probably the biggest one is anger. Children of divorce, when they become adults, they have lots of unresolved anger. And we tend to drag that into our adulthood. And anger can result from a lot of factors. Just a couple of them would be loss. We have a lot of loss. We might lose friends because we have to change schools. We might not be able to do sports anymore. We can lose whole sides of the family.
Yep.
We often lose one of our parents. At least half the time. So there's a lot of losses, and we have nowhere to go with that, and we can become angry. The other issue we deal with, even as kids, when our parents divorce, is the loyalty challenge. That's what I call it. Basically, who do you love more, me or dad? And it can be really crazy. I tell the story of one time I was leading worship, and at the time my dad was already on his third marriage, and they were all visit. My mom and my sister had come in, and my dad and his wife had come in, and my sister was coming in from the coast. Everybody comes in when she was here. We all go to church. I go early because I'm leading worship, and I go up on the platform, do the worship. I come down, sit in the pew, and I'm facing the platform. Well, as I'm facing the platform, they all come in. So I go up to the platform. I see this. I turn around, and this is what I see. Starting on the left, I've got, my dad, my stepmom, my sister, my other sister, my wife, and then I have my mom and my other sister. Now the question is when I'm done, who do I sit next to? And I mean, at this point, I'm 50 years old and I teach this stuff. Mm-hmm. Who do I sit next to? I'm not going to climb over everybody to get to the center. Now, if you're from an intact family, it's no big deal. You just sit down and chances are your parents are together.
Right.
But those of you who have divorced parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And let's reframe that. You're in elementary school and you just played trumpet on the band concert. You're done. And they say, go sit with your parents. Mm-hmm. And your dad's sitting on the one side with his girlfriend and your mom's sitting on the other side. Mm-hmm. Who do you sit next to? And the kid's going, well, I want to sit with my dad because I don't get to see him that much. But if I sit with my dad, my mom's going to be mad. And if I sit with my mom, my dad's going to be mad because I never get to see him. And he wants me to like his girlfriend, but I don't really like his girlfriend because she wasn't whatever. And I really want to sit with my mom. But if I sit with my mom, and this kid's like 9 years old.
True. Yeah.
And the next day, he goes in his class and somebody takes his pencil or something and he goes, whack. And the teacher goes, what was that all about? Mm-hmm. And he doesn't know. Well, that same kid grows up. And that anger is still there. And he'll snap off or whatever, and he'll blame his boss or politics or whatever. But the reality of it is he still doesn't know. And that anger is still there, and it needs to be resolved. So anger is one of the big issues. Fears is another issue. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of doom, fear of inadequacy or inferiority, fear of marriage. And it's kind of ironic because the Bible over and over talks it says, don't fear.
Right.
And yet we are full of fear. The fear of doom is really interesting. That was one of the things I mentioned, the unexpected legacy of divorce. That was the thing that really struck out at me. The fear of doom is basically waiting for the rug to get pulled out from you at any time. Mm-hmm. And basically, when you have somebody from an intact family, and the job's going good, the wife's going, the husband, the marriage is good, the kids are behaving, you kind of go, and you relax. Your anxiety level goes down. Mm-hmm. If you have divorced parents and the job's going good and the marriage is good and the kids are behaving and everything's going great, your anxiety level goes up because you're expecting it to fail. It's going to collapse. So what happens is Jesus offers us abundant life. I call that 0 to 10 life. 0 is really horrible. 10 is fantastic. But often when we have divorced parents, we live between 4 and 7. We're not going to get above 7 because we're only going to be disappointed anyway. Mm-hmm. And we don't get below 4 because we feel like if we really start to deal with what we're dealing with today, we're going to just lose it and just wad in a pool of Jell-O or something. Mm-hmm. So we don't live that abundant life that Christ offers us between 4 and 7, but that's all based, on fears. Another issue is trust. We don't trust. We really make people trust us. And a lot of this becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. We poke them with a stick, poke them with a stick, poke them with a stick to see if they can trust them. We poke them, and eventually they go, I'm sick of this, and they leave. And they go, see, I knew I couldn't trust them. Mm-hmm. And we just, we just see the cycle kind of go. Another issue is it distorts her view of God. Elizabeth Marquardt, she wrote a book called Between Two Worlds. I think I mentioned that. And she showed all sorts of research about how we see scriptures differently. Honor your father and your mother is the first commandment with a promise.
Yep.
Well, but you're sitting in the pew going, well, that may be good for you, and that may be good for you to my right, but honor my parents? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And we start to cherry pick what's actually applicable to us and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And we have to be very, very careful of that. And the last issue I'll touch here real quickly is father hunger. Father hunger is the missing dad, basically. And for guys, the question is, do I have what it takes to be a male? Because we lose that model. We lose that, whatever. And in society today, the whole anti-male thing is just really problematic. But also when there's a divorce, 70% of them are, initiated by the women. And it's not uncommon for the boy to hear her on the phone going, guys are always the same and I don't understand whatever and all this sort of stuff. And we lose our image of what is a guy. Mm-hmm. And for the women, it gets tricky. Because the women are wired to receive the answer to two questions. Am I beautiful and am I special? Mm-hmm. And when I say beautiful, I'm not talking about supermodel beauty. I'm talking about beautiful in the eyes of my dad. And special. Am I special to my dad? And divorce, even under the best of circumstances, the answer they get is no. The research shows that girls in particular receive the divorce egocentrically, that basically the dad didn't leave mom, he left them. If they had been prettier, if they had been smarter, if they'd just done whatever. And we know this isn't true. But that's how they kind of internalize it. And what happens is if they don't get the answer to those two questions from a constructive, healthy source, i.e. a dad or a good uncle, then they're going to get it out there somewhere. And unfortunately, those answers often have strings attached. So when I do a workshop, if I do an overview teaching this thing, but if I have time to do a couple of workshops, I'll always do anger and father hunger, because anger affects both, but comes out more destructively with guys. Father hunger affects both, but it comes out more destructively with the women.
So what do you say to people who will recognize, okay, that's me, right? I'm struggling with that sort of what you would call father hunger. Maybe she would frame it a different way because she couldn't put a name on it, or you recognize it's particularly, these things, like you said, you're in the middle of the bell curve, because you could talk to, women who have had abuse at the hands of their father, or the absent father who never seemed to care. Right. But how do you take a woman whose heart has been broken in that particular way and steer her toward hope and healing?
When I do the father hunger workshop is one of the more powerful ones, because it really hits the women. I can remember I was doing just an interview with a cassette recorder. It tells you how long ago it was. And we weren't even talking about that. We were talking about something else, and something, I think, I never talk about father hunger. Well, what's that? Well, that's when the dad leaves and we miss them. And suddenly there's tears in her eyes. It was amazing just to see that. But when I talk to the women, one of the things we talk about is that first we have to identify what the issue is. And then we have to identify where the healing comes from. And that comes from God. And I take them to Psalm 139. And it talks about how God's thoughts are precious for us. And the word precious is esteemed, valued, really special. And that is how God sees them. And it's really important. This whole topic where I say that our brain, when our parents divorce, our programming gets distorted and we start believing lies instead of truth. I can't trust anybody. I'm not special. I'm worthless. And in reality, God says that we are incredibly special. So I try and impart to those women that God knows they're beautiful and God knows they're special, and that is truth that we can stand on. And we want to make sure that we are putting hedges up to find guys who understand that. Because I like to say that God's love gives. It doesn't take. And that's so important, because very often guys' love takes. It doesn't give. And we have to reframe of, even though we've had the losses, we've had, dad wasn't there, or he was sort of there, or whatever, but we are still special in the eyes of God. So what we do is we learn, how did father hunger affect us? Because it's different for every woman. And then we take the truth of God's word to marry that to it, so we're walking in the truth and in a healthy relationship with healthy boundaries going forward.
Boy, it's so important. And I hope that there are people who are listening to this today who are struggling maybe in their marriage, their relationship, and they just think, it's not that big of a deal. We'll just get divorced and we'll move on. But these are things that impact children for a lifetime, and it's important. I was looking at some of the quotes that you have in your book, and is it Elizabeth Marquardt? Is that who you were talking about?
Yeah.
How you say her name?
Yeah.
She said, "I missed my mother and father terribly when I was separated from one of them, and I was always separated from one of them."
Yes.
And that's the truth, no matter where you are in life, whether you're a young child or you're an adult. And it gets even more complicated when you introduce a step parent then into the situation.
Goodness. Yeah. It really, and I can't remember if it was Wallerstein or Marquardt that said it, but parents tend to fall into certain responsibilities in our eyes. If we need something built or we need something or whatever, we go to maybe dad. If we need, nurturing or whatever, we tend to go to mom. Or if we want to get something we know that mom's not going to give us, we go to dad or whatever, But what happens is when they're separate, we lose that half. And again, Hughes and Friedenberg in their book, Home Will Never Be the Same Again, they made a really interesting observation. They said that divorce is like oxygen. And basically oxygen, we don't know. I mean, we don't see it. We know it's there. We know we need it. I did a mission trip to Ecuador, and we were up at like 9,200 feet above sea level or something like that. And you don't see it, but there's a lot less oxygen there. And when you go up the stairs, suddenly you're going, I know I'm not as young as I used to be. Man, it's like
this
whatever.
This is crazy.
Yeah, this is nuts. I mean, this is crazy. And you don't see it. And with divorce, their observation was really interesting. There are stuff we have in an intact family that's like oxygen. It's just there. And when it's gone, that's when you start to know, wait a minute, that's not there anymore, or that's not there anymore, and that's not there anymore. And one of the things that we do as adults with divorced parents, or we don't do, but we should do, is grieve. There's loss and lots of losses. And one of the things, because we tend to, society says it's no big deal, it's a bump in the road, and all sort of jazz, just get over it, is that we don't grieve, but yet we do grieve. Mm-hmm. We've got Christmases that are you made the comment about off the book about, do we hate Christmas? Mm-hmm. And I wrote an article some years ago called I Hate Christmas.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of us Christians that can't wait for Christmas to be over. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wait a minute. This is the season of our Savior's birth, and we can't wait for it to be over because of all the grief that it comes from. You can always tell somebody who has divorced parents at that time of the year, because you just go, hey, what are you going to be doing for Christmas? And if they start with, they probably have divorced parents.
Yeah, it's true, because they're, go see my dad on this day, and we're never, and it's true, Christmas is never the same again. I remember walking through a divorce of a family member very, very close to me. And divorce is just in my family. It's almost, I feel like it's just like in the DNA of my family. And I'll never forget, talking to this person and her telling me that in her estimation, divorce was worse than death. Because if the person dies, then you've got closure. Mm-hmm. And instead, you're living with rejection. And that's how she framed it to me. She said, I would have rather that there had been a death, because this feels like a rejection that I will never overcome. And I thought, what an interesting, like the reaction that she was having was a visceral reaction, because the truth is God made marriage to be a lifetime covenant. Mm-hmm. And when we misunderstand the precious nature and the covenant relationship that God intended between a husband and a wife, it really does have generational consequences.
It does. And it's an interesting analogy that you raise, because in a lot of ways it's true. If somebody, 48, the husband drops dead, aneurysm or something like that, it's a crisis. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the neighbors will step up, and the church will step up, and it's a crisis, and they'll make sure the kids are taken to the games or whatever, and all that sort of stuff happens. If that same guy leaves, support pulls out.
Yeah.
Families don't know who can we talk to. Neighbors, the small groups, all the social groups. Do we pick sides? Can we go with them without offending them? And all the support that we need pulls out. And additionally, that 40-year-old or 48-year-old that died, that wasn't his choice. Mm-hmm. When they divorce, it is purposely leaving.
Yeah.
So the rejection is real. And the death, although we have the anniversary, we have all the reminders and all that, it kind of fades over time. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Divorce doesn't go away.
That's right.
In fact, I think it was, I don't remember who said it, but basically they said divorce is a funeral that never ends.
Boy.
And I know it sounds kind of a downer and all that, but the reality of it is that many of the people listening are like I was. Denial. Mm-hmm. It's no big deal. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. There's times you want to just scream, but it's not really a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it is. Our programming has been rewired, and we have distortions going on that are not true, and we need to address those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. I'm wondering if you could speak to the spouse of someone who is married to an adult child of divorce. And maybe they're seeing things, I would imagine that there's someone listening to this today who's like, oh, hey, I didn't expect there to be any implications because when I married my wife or when I married my husband, they seemed just fine. But we're dealing with trust issues. We, clearly, and as we move along in our marriage, we see more and more of this. Do you address this in the book? And how can you encourage the spouse, somebody who's married to an adult child from divorce home?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When I do a little blurb or something or whatever, you'll see people elbowing the person next to them.
Yeah, right, of course, always.
That's you.
Yeah. Are you paying attention? Are you listening?
Absolutely. What I normally do is I tell people, get the book and learn. And then it's the same thing. I'll have one of the surprises with the book was one of my concerns was what are divorced parents going to think? Because our heart isn't bashing, our heart isn't whatever. And we were very pleasantly surprised of the response from divorced parents because what they found was reading the book, because the book is basically an overview of the issues. I mean, it's just a bunch of daily devotionals that covers the various issues that affect, adults with divorced parents.
Right.
And what they found was that it gave them a common dialogue to speak with them. What are the actual issues? And for that spouse that's got a spouse who's got divorced parents and they tough it out through the holidays or, the birthdays, you can almost start seeing them get more agitated when you're coming up to a birthday or coming up to something where they're going to see the family members. I encourage them. It's not because I'm saying my book is so great. I'm just saying that the reality of it is that it covers the major issues that are probably impacting your spouse. And when you read something and you kind of go, that's them, maybe you can say, hey, you know what? I read this little vignette here. And it sounds an awful lot like what you've experienced. Can you look at this and tell me, is this kind of what you went through? And now you have that opening for a low conflict dialogue where we can kind of nudge our way into these issues, and ideally healing can come.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, for as many years as my husband and I have been married, one of the things that he has done for me over the years, because it took me quite a long time to sort of process even where I was, how I was feeling, because of course my parents got divorced and then they got remarried, and in some cases married again even after that. And one of the things that my husband did for me, which I thought was so powerful, was he just let me grieve. Like it was okay for me to not be okay.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we want so much to help our spouse get over whatever it is that they're hurting about, that we just say, hey, that was a long time ago. Let's just look forward. But the reality is you have to be, and I think, that's part of what I'm seeing you write about in the book. You really have to be able to look this stuff in the eye and walk through it and sift through it. And boy, if you've got, if you're married to somebody who will allow you to do that and even walk through it with you, it's a pretty big deal. I want to say it might have been 1992 or 93. I went through a book called The Search for Significance. Oh, yeah. And it was life-changing for me because I saw myself in my father's eyes. And once my parents divorced, boy, I'll tell you, it was like your world just turns upside down on its head. And you have trust issues and all these things. And when I went through the search for significance, it was kind of, because the whole idea was to reframe the way I saw myself. And I love that you pointed out that healing comes from God. You're not going to get it from your spouse. Nope. You're not going to get it from, you're not going to get it by going back to those parents and trying to sift through what went wrong and all the things. It really does come from the Lord, and that is where our significance comes from. And I'm assuming you've seen the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, working through this process enabled me. It's kind of funny because a lot of times the concern is, well, if I go through this, I'm not going to love my parents anymore. I found the opposite. One of the things that I found was working through this process, I love my parents more because it freed me up from the anger and the bitterness and all that sort of stuff that kind of stands between us and love. And it enabled me to really have compassion for my parents. The other thing that spending 20 years dealing with this is that not only do I deal with the parents or with the kids, the adult kids, but I am also reading divorce stuff all the time. And I've dealt with divorced parents, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, so I deal with divorce and that sort of stuff. And I have seen the pain that divorced parents go through.
It's real.
So, yeah. And it's normally they say it's the second, from emotional level of pain, it's second only to the death of a spouse. It is very, very high up there. And as we had already mentioned, in some cases, ongoing wise, it's worse.
Yeah, I think in many cases, I would say it's worse, especially if there continues to be animosity between the two parents and the kids are forever in the middle. It's just a horrific thing. I want to talk about your book for a minute because we've got about 4.5 minutes left. I want to talk about this because you wrote a book, Choose a Better Path. And I'm curious what you're hearing back from it. How is your book impacting adults who have been struggling through kind of reconciling their feelings about their divorced parents and going forward?
It's been really exciting because, again, it's a user-friendly book. It's not a book you have to read all these pages and stuff. It basically is a bunch of vignettes, a story. It has a story or narrative, then it'll have a little prayer section and a little journaling section, and it just covers the major issues that affect affect adults with divorced parents. So the response has been very positive as far as I had no idea that was going on. I thought I was the only one that this was affecting. And, it's been very, very positive.
Yeah. And I would imagine a large part of the reason why is because you write in a way that's very easy and relatable. It's easy to read. It's relatable. Yeah. Something that caught my eye, and I'd highlighted it, was a section called It's All My Fault. And I think a lot of kids can relate to this. And you started out by saying that Stephen King wrote a horror novel called It. Many children of divorce and the adults they become live in a haunting nonfiction tale called If. Yeah. I thought that was so good. Well, I call it the what if monster, right? But you said, if I'd clean up my room, if I was prettier, if I'd kept mom and dad from arguing, if I'd eaten my dinner like I was asked, if I'd done better in school, if I'd kept dad's secret, if I'd done my chores without complaining, if I wasn't mean to my sister, if I hadn't made mom mad, then my folks wouldn't have divorced. It's all my fault. And you say the if phantom preys on children and adults alike. And I love that you have addressed that because I think, especially if you can carry this your entire life. And you point out, you gotta shift your perspective.
Yeah, it's really important. And I think that's another thing. It's never too late. I was doing a workshop, I still remember it. I was doing a workshop on father hunger, and after I was done, this lady came up, and she was in her 60s, and there's tears in her eyes. And she said, I finally get it. That's what the struggle has been. And it's so wonderful to see that because now, guess what? Now there's a new beginning. We know what the lies are. We've shined the light in the darkness. We can now walk in the truth. And that's so exciting. And I love the opportunity to help people do that.
The other thing I love about this is that you have taken great care to point people back to the Lord through the entire book. And you do it here too, saying that the bottom line of what I would call the what if monster is illustrated by the words of Joshua used when he challenged the Israelites, choose this day who you will serve. Joshua was saying, serve the one true God or serve false gods. Our parents had a similar choice, serve God or serve the God of self. And then you say a section, a moment with God, and you pray, Lord, help me to dismiss the ifs that haunt me sometimes. Help me to realize that they are lies and that my parents' choice to divorce was their own. And I think there's healing. And again, pointing people back to God. The healing is going to come from God. It's not going to come from a self-diagnosis. It's not going to come from navel gazing. It's not going to come, it's not even going to come from a book, as good as this one is. And that's why I love that you are pointing your readers always through the book, back to Scripture, back to the Lord. That is really where healing is found. Are you going to keep talking about this? You can keep, you're going to crank out some more resources. What's your plans coming up, Kent?
Well, actually, I'm in the process of finishing another book right now, hoping to have it, the draft done by the end of this month. And it's basically, the working title is The Premarital Counseling Guide for Adults with Divorced Parents.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, if we don't deal with these issues in premarital counseling, then we're launching them sideways. I mean, if we don't ask, why did your parents divorce? Well, so one of them had an affair. we've got to deal with that because guess what? We got trust issues on steroids. Fear of doom, fear of abandonment is all running rampant, and we haven't even started the marriage yet. So, and I've had a number of clients come to me, and I'll say, well, did they ask you about the divorce? No. And they cover the major issues for marriage, but they don't cover this very important stuff that, nobody's talking about. So the goal is I'll have that written by the end of this month, and hopefully we'll book by the end of the year or so.
I love that. One of the things that I'm looking at, just going through the book, and I'm just like, oh man, I can relate to that. And I've done a fair amount of counseling, mostly of moms, throughout my adult life who have struggled with this same situation. But I find oftentimes when I'm talking with them, you go from sort of the what if monster to then also realizing that you're an empath. Like a lot of these young people coming out of these situations literally feel somebody else's emotions, and they're trying so hard to keep peace in the room that there's no room for their own emotions because they're so busy trying to regulate the emotions of other people. Have you noticed that also?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's kind of funny. One of the conferences I speak at, or that I did speak at last one, is the American Association of Christian Counselors, which is 6,000 to 7,000 social workers, counselors, pastoral things. And it's kind of funny because often wounded people become counselors. And normally I'll say about 50% of the people have divorce thing. There at AACC, I'm guessing it's probably 60 to 70% have divorced parents because of that empathy, because they want to heal, because they want to make sure people are feeling better and don't go through what they did. The other thing I want to mention, I forgot on the book, is you mentioned how it's kind of formatted with the prayer and with the journaling. I wrote it also for non-believers because I want to kind of teach them to pray, that God, you can pray to him, and that you can journal, and that he is faithful. And throughout the book, because I figure people that know how to pray are going to pray. But the people who don't, it kind of guides them and kind of teaches them how to pray and who they're praying to.
Well, and I would say, if somebody, even someone who's walked with the Lord a long time, you're in enough pain, you don't know how to pray.
Yeah.
I love that the Bible says that when we can't speak, that the Holy Spirit intercedes for us with groanings that are too deep for words. And I think one of the reasons why I love the prayer section in this is because there are a lot of people who are going through deep water like this, and they just don't even have the strength to pray. And so to sort of say, hey, here, let's start here. Let's ask the Lord for this. I just think it's beautiful. I'm holding the book, obviously, Choose a Better Path, Overcoming the Impact of Your Parents' Divorce. I love this book, Kent, Darcie, and I'm thankful that you wrote it. And I can't wait to see how God uses you in the months to come. Thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find your book if they're interested in ordering it?
Easiest way is to go to hope4adp.com. It's hope, the number 4adp.com. It's available as a book, audiobook, and an ebook.
I love it. Ken, Darcie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Let's touch base again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks again.
If you guys want more information on my guest today, and I hope that you will, hop on over to HeidiSt.John.com/podcast. I will link back to this website in the show notes today. And again, you guys know, I've talked about this a lot. This topic is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that you have been encouraged today and blessed to know that there is hope out there. There is healing, and healing is ultimately found in the Lord. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you back here again at the intersection of faith